Hi, everyone. This is Jen from the debate that just happened on Modern Day Debate. Link is in the comments. I thought it might be fun to have a bit of a chat with whoever was interested. Thanks for all the people who are already in the audience and commenting. Appreciate seeing everyone. So I'm joined by Duvid, my regular streaming partner, who will be opening this show with comments on the debate. Thanks so much for being here with us. And I'm just about to pin the link in case anyone wants to join, if you'd like to share your opinions or if you have any thoughts about evolution.
Oh yeah, great job, Jen. Nice to be streaming again. People who follow regularly, Week in Review. Jennifer had a change in schedule, so Duvid is taking Week in Review solo on my channel Sunday nights. Over 6 months now. It's been like almost 9 months since we've done Week in Review. But me and Jennifer have prepared and done multiple evolution debates, and there's a lot to talk about. So we got Dr. Sell here, and great debate. Appreciate you coming in. Jennifer was on my channel this last week, and we were supposed to be talking about transmigration of souls with Kevin McCarran, the PhD in Japan of neuroscience, and we couldn't get past the metaphysics. And one of the biggest problems
I
we had.
told them about it actually because we were talking, like we had a Zoom call privately to prepare for the debate, and I actually told them about that. I was like, I just debated for 5 freaking hours, and it wasn't even supposed to be a debate.
Yeah, so I'll hand it directly to Dr. Sell because we appreciate you coming on, and great performance and a lot of scholarship. And maybe just because me and Jennifer have streamed hundreds of hours and talked about this at length. And I'm a big proponent of the philosophy of science. And a lot of people don't realize that there's even a field of philosophy of science, don't know much about it. There's only a few schools in the whole world that actually have departments of philosophy of science. And the Vienna School and the difficulty of differentiating metaphysics from science. And one of the biggest things we had, you're trying to talk with Kevin McCarran, was science makes predictions. Metaphysics, I was saying generally, like there's different schools of metaphysics, but generally, metaphysics doesn't make predictions. Metaphysics is the framework of which science has to be grounded, and it's based on presuppositions. And we want to talk about like what's a soul, what's how would that transmigrate, and we couldn't even get to the basis of metaphysics because you're not going to agree on metaphysics. Metaphysics is very different. So my claim was science generally goes what's based on the correspondence theory of truth, and it could be tested against nature through predictions. Metaphysics is based on coherence because metaphysics doesn't actually it's a framework, and so metaphysics is based on how well does the system actually uh, cohere. And evolution, I would claim, is a combination of a metaphysical theory and a scientific theory. And so if you wanted to break the debate down and say, well, what are your metaphysical presuppositions to understand science in? And it's a big problem because people don't even realize that this is not a solved issue, and scientists don't agree. Most scientists don't have a background in metaphysics, and then the philosophers of science, there's actually no agreements on metaphysics of science. And then there's a little bit of a push that most materialists fall into, which is like metaphysics isn't important. You don't need metaphysics. Science can answer everything, which anyone who's studied the issue largely knows is false. That science necessitates a metaphysical framework. So, appreciate you being here. Dr. Sell, any comments on what I said, or just on the debate or anything? The floor is yours.
Sorry,
You're
I'm a doctoral student. I'm not yet a Dr. Sell. I do have several degrees though, so some people say I should be a doctor, but I'm trying to formalize it now. Thank you for the kind words. Um, One thing that is important about science is that it can transcend a lot of different metaphysical views, which is interesting. Um, so you could have a, you know, or let's not just metaphysical, we could say worldview. So you could just have someone who's an atheist, a Hindu, and a Christian. They can work together as a scientific team. And so there's probably something I don't quite know how to say it. There's kind of an independence of, science does have a metaphysic, but it's so minimalistic it can fit in a lot of different metaphysical frameworks. So we could probably extract a kernel of metaphysics that is so minimal that it can be part of a lot of different metaphysical frameworks. So I would say science boils down to kind of observation. What is it? Observation and hypothesis forming and hypothesis testing, kind of those three. So, someone with very different metaphysics, like say an atheist versus a Christian, they could have certain scientific theories that they'll agree on.
I don't think Christians metaphysics was like dualism's a metaphysics, and so I mean, you could be Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, dualist, but I mean Christianity is not a clear metaphysics. And then the question of, are you a dualist and believe in a separate spiritual and material realm, and how do you understand the interaction of the creator, cosmology, eschatology, things like prophecy, transcendence, power of prayer. But I don't think religion is actually a form of metaphysics that you could have a metaphysics that could actually fit multiple religious frameworks. And so a lot of Christians believe in evolution. A lot of Christians are monist or dualist. I tend towards dualism, and I've learned a lot about the history of Western science, and like Galileo, Descartes, and Newton, and the dualistic separation in science. From my understanding, is just about the material laws. And as a dualist, I say, well, the soul, spirituality, God, those aren't material things, and science has very little to nothing to say about that. From the materialist perspective, science is trying to say more than it's capable of, even evolution. If you're trying to say, well, the origin of consciousness, I would say consciousness is non-material, or the origins of the soul, what happens after death. Jennifer, is a non-dualist. That's her philosophy, non-dualism, but panpsychism. But I'm not sure if you say, like, if you agree that Christianity is not a metaphysics, because there could be multiple metaphysics of Christianity, that you need something more dualism, monism, or it's a philosophical view about in saying the physics. When I debated evolution against Joanna Miller, it took like 30 minutes. I broke it down: the problem of physics, the problem of chemistry, the problem of biology. So just the problem of physics, there's a lot of problems of just the metaphysics of physics, of the postulations. Do you have like a three-dimensional, with time and objects and masses as a given, as a postulate, and then to get from physics to chemistry, and then from chemistry to biology, and then from biology to evolution? There's problems at every single one of those steps.
So, my terminology may have been very loose. I don't study philosophy, so I stand corrected for anything that I misspoke. I was just saying that kind of the procedure or the practice of science is very minimalistic. It seems to, people of a variety of whatever views they have, they seem to be able to agree on a few minimal things. Maybe we might not agree on what the definition of science is, but we can agree whether we think a theory is credible or not. So we had some theories about chemistry that no longer hold, and now we have some that are now accepted, at least good enough to be able to make all sorts of chemicals and pharmaceuticals, etc. And same for electromagnetism. Electromagnetism, both the classical and the quantum version, they're very stable theories. Generators work, and cars work because of electricity. It has a battery, it has an alternator, it has spark plugs, and these are very predictable and reliable. So from a practical standpoint, there's certain theories that we totally accept. Evolution is not one of them where there's uniform agreement, and it does conflict with some of the accepted scientific theories. So Um, I don't know how that fits into the framework of metaphysics. I'm more of a pragmatist, at least as far as my philosophy of science. It's like if it works, if it gives me a theory that I can make useful things in, that's adequate for my purposes.
Yeah, I don't know if Jennifer. She said she had to do something for a minute, so if she's not back, or she could.
Oh, I'm here. I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. I've got my explanation. I don't know if my chicken scratch is actually legible, so I'm sorry if it's not. But just a very quick overview. You've got a person who is conceptualizing the world. They make a world model and then realize that they can predict things about the future based on their world model. And then from there, realize that they can model subsets of the world in a similar way. So that's where science comes from. So when you are modeling reality, a subset of reality using your own conceptualization, and in physics, we tend to measure amounts. So the measurement of an amount necessitates both a mathematical and a mechanical attribution. So with regards to mathematics, the ontological status of numbers is unknown. So we basically have to start from the position that the numbers don't have an ontological status, because if they did, well, we would probably already know it. So that's a problem. And then mechanics invokes the ontological status of objects. What does that mean? Well, if we're going to make a mechanical model, we have to have some inclination about what matter is able to do. So these are two sources of uncertainty, or what I call indeterminacy. So any empirical observation is subject to what's called biconditional indeterminacy. So if you want to understand this, the way Duvid and I look at things is basically, we're not going to talk about the results of science. We're going to talk about the biconditional indeterminacy and whether, in spite of the biconditional indeterminacy, were the conclusions still acceptable. So the problem, I guess I would say, with modern understanding of this stuff is that biconditional indeterminacy isn't even understood or acknowledged. That sort of, there's a presupposition, or at least the door's left open to some sort of Platonic realism to numbers, where it's just like, well, of course we can use numbers to measure amounts, and of course electrons exist, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying electrons don't exist. It's just that our model can't tell us the degree to which the electron's existence depends on the measurement devices that we're making inferences about its properties from.
So this discussion reminds me of a saying that I found very amusing. All theories, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I have a lot of sentiment to that, is that, we kind of make the best description we can. It doesn't mean we're absolutely right, but there's certainly some models and theories that work better, for our everyday lives, and especially in a technologically advanced society. So I would just say that, the model that seems to give the most testable predictions is probably closer to the truth. It may not be the absolute truth. So when I actually listed those, the laws of nature, not everyone actually believes that those are complete or accurate. In fact, some of them are known to be inaccurate, but they're still useful.
Yeah, well, I mean, from the canonization, originally of physics, where you have universal laws of nature described in mathematical formulas, and whatever laws of physics that have been accepted, but even that is problematic just to have, because there's metaphysical presuppositions, and so Newton generally just had the presupposition of masses operating in three-dimensional space over time. And even with the advancements of, like, Einstein or quantum mechanics, there's just more and more paradoxes, but generally we just accept this metaphysical presupposition that there's such a thing as masses operating in three-dimensional space over time that is necessary. The laws are all idealizations that do not actually describe a reality, but an ideal form of reality that may or may not actually exist. And then, the difficulty to even have a unique object that you're going to define an object and then going to apply mathematical laws. So you say pragmatically, it makes predictions, it works, in the connection between science and engineering, and where you could build technology, you could have it work, you could have mathematical models, and then build devices that work based on those mathematical models. And what you're going to call truth is a completely different question. So many scientists don't even consider scientific theories truth. If you're going to consider it truth, then you say, well, if you have a larger framework for truth for things like morals, ethics, law, logic, and various things. So, I mean, I guess, are you Christian, Sal?
Oh, sorry. I usually keep my mic off. Yes, I am a Christian.
So, I mean, if you're going to have truth claims like about salvation, about you'll call karma, action, reaction, reward, and punishment, the origin of the soul, the destination of the soul, and you say, well, true is implying that the claim corresponds to reality. You might also have models of, we'll call spiritual models, that you like prayer, being effective, doing good deeds, causing good reactions, doing bad deeds, causing bad reactions. And you could also call those models, and those models are predictive, but not in the same way of science and material laws.
Well, for me, there are a few things. There are not many things we can be absolutely sure of. There's only one thing I think each person can be absolutely sure of is their own pain. When I'm in a dental office, it's like I'm not going to even have a debate when he's drilling away and it hurts. I mean, I wish I could rationalize it away, but I think, there's.
Just to put doubt to that. No, I mean, I don't think you can have certainty over anything. And so the claim is, if you're going to say, can you have certainty that I am my body? And to say that I am in a sensation of pain, who is the I? And you're saying, well, the I, but I don't even think you can have certainty of that. And I don't know if you would take like, okay, I'm a dualist, and I would just say, I'm not my body. And I don't know if in your Christian framework, if you would identify as your body, and then even how you would describe pain. You just say, whatever the I is, I'm definitely certain that's in a state of pain, but even to understand what that means.
Well, you don't have, for me, I'm like, that's the most basal thing, that I can't deny that I hurt. Whether I can try, I can't. Yeah, see, that's the problem, is I don't have to presume it. I mean, you could torture someone.
You do have to presume it.
No, I don't. I feel it. You're going to say I don't feel the pain just because I can't prove it to you or anyone else?
Well, you have to presume that there's an
I don't have to presume it. Even a baby doesn't have to make any presumption when he's feeling pain.
I just reject it. I don't believe that there's actually an I. Like either as a like a materialist, as a eliminativist materialist about consciousness and illusion, or you're just like a computer code that's running, there is no I, or some sort of spiritual the world, but just to be skeptical, like, no, I reject that there's an I. So how do you prove that I exists besides your subjective? Like, no, I'm certain that the I is, but if I'm, how do you convince the skeptic of that I that you're so sure of?
I really don't care about what someone else thinks. It's my experience, and I know I hurt. That is so basic. No one has to accept it. I don't have to prove it to anyone.
But it's not a truth claim then. It's just a subjective.
It doesn't matter whether it's a truth claim or not. I feel it. Okay.
Yeah, there's a bit of a gray area with knowledge claims in philosophy. Is it what you can know from your own perspective, or is it what you can know, like, based on some allegedly mind-independent criterion? So,
I mean, I know it from my own perspective as far as I'm practically concerned. If I'm
like, I'm inclined to agree with what Sal is saying, that what he's saying, it is knowledge because it derives directly from perception.
I mean, that's why I don't.
So maybe it's not knowledge in the sense that it can't be justified to an arbitrary logical standard, but I still think that it is knowledge.
Well, I'm willing to go there and say that
that's the most, to me, that's the most basal fact that anyone at an individual level, they cannot deny. I mean, they can say they deny it, but they'll feel it. I mean, when I have to get an injection, it's unpleasant.
well, I'm not
But,
disagreeing. I know what
it-
it's like to be in
to
a state
me,
of pain.
to me, it's just ridiculous to have a philosophical discussion to say I don't feel pain when I feel pain. That's
Well, I can
ridiculous.
say that to say I know what it's like to have pain, but I'm willing to at least philosophically examine the possibility that I don't really exist or that I don't really know who I am, and just say, well, subjectively, I understand that I feel pain, and when I'm in pain, there's nothing that could do to stop it, except pray or God, God willing, the state of pain disappears. But from a truth level, that I'm willing to at least go there and say, well, I recognize the possibility that I don't really exist or that my feeling is inaccurate or not a claim on reality or truth.
Well, if you cannot even accept that you have pain, you have no reason to suppose that any of your metaphysics is correct anyway, because the most basal thing you have is not whether you can think or philosophize. It's
Well,
whether you
he's
feel
saying
pain.
that the pain is predicated on I, and that he can't be certain about the I. So I think what Duvid is saying, like, metaphysics to me is not really about agreeing; it's just about understanding. And it seems that what Duvid's saying is metaphysically coherent.
Yeah, I understand completely what you're saying. I'm not arguing. I'm just saying from a pure point of logic or truth that you have to presuppose the I. And so you're saying like, no, I'm not presupposing the I. I'm certain about the I. But I'm just saying from a philosophical point of view, it's
From
like
a
you are
philosoph-
actually presupposing the I.
from a philosophical standpoint, you have to presuppose something. I mean, there's that's been shown that you can't. I mean, unless you're omniscient, you have to assume something. And the most for each person, the most basic thing, they can deny that they exist, but they sure can't deny their pain. I mean, you can't persuade me when someone is, jabbing me with some painful instrument like a scalpel, and I'm not under anesthesia. No one's going to persuade me I'm not feeling something. I mean, no metaphysician is ever going to say, "Oh, you don't feel pain. It's an illusion. The I doesn't exist." I mean, to me,
Well,
the
they
most
do.
basal,
I
the
mean,
most
actually, there are
Well,
metaphysicians.
the
There are
logic
metaphysicians
is
who
pretty
do.
straightforward. It's basically like, if you accept that you need a presupposition in order to get anywhere logically, and you also accept that presuppositions are justified in a manner that is necessarily circular, at least within our own experience, that there's a level of indeterminacy to the presumptions required, the presuppositions required, that makes all the conclusions, no matter how many presuppositions we go through, the conclusions are not the truth because they're tainted by the indeterminacy of the presupposition. So you don't have to agree with that, but that's basically where we tend to start.
Yeah, I'm not even sure we're arguing or just I'm just making the point that there has to be presuppositions and
No,
I.
I don't think we're arguing. I think we're just establishing what exactly metaphysics is saying, because a lot of people get confused with, like, well, you don't need metaphysics, you just have science, 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 science. But science is a composite technology that metaphysics allows you to take apart the components of science, like a broken machine. See, like, oh, this part's not working. And part of understanding how the machine of science works is how the engine of presuppositions is in some sense necessary for formal conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, so you're essentially just saying what Descartes says, like that, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, or like I'm in pain, therefore I am. I've experienced pain, therefore I am. But still, that's I mean, it might be the most reasonable of all presuppositions, of all arguments, of all. If you're going to make any presupposition, the most reasonable presupposition to start with is that there is an I, that I do actually exist. But from a point of logic and a point of pure philosophy, you should at least recognize that that is actually a presupposition. And even if you think it's extremely reasonable presupposition, I'm not arguing that. It's to say that, okay, so we start with that presupposition of the I, the I that experiences, and then you're going to extract to that to trying to understand the exterior material world, to trying to come up with universal laws about the material realm that are testable, and all that is basically contingent upon uh, the I, the original presupposition. And we don't have to get lost in the metaphysics, but I mean, it becomes hard to get to the science if you can't get through the metaphysics, because the metaphysics is like the precursor to the science. And then you're just like, well, where does evolution fit in? And um, so like you got to start somewhere, and so evolution is usually starting with this kind of like jumbo collection of like quasi unified science that in reality doesn't exist. And I mean, Dr. Goethe was actually, I mean, he was pretty reasonable on that. And I thought you were pretty reasonable in terms of like, what are you actually debating? So it's just kind of a discussion, and people are sharing their knowledge or expertise in that. And then I don't know if you want, try to, where do you get in your, so to say, are you a spiritualist? Do you believe in the soul? Do you believe that the I survives death? Do you believe in heaven and hell? And so that's the importance of the I question, is say, well, if the I that experiences pain, is that implying that you are the body? And then you're saying, well, does that mean you believe that you don't survive death? And presumably, general Christian theology does believe that you do survive death, and the I is at least more than the body.
Sal, I don't know if you want to jump in and say anything, or if you wanted to comment on how you thought the debate went. Because I thought like that we came across really strong. I know not everyone. I don't think everyone, like, we didn't get a majority of the votes, but I do think I think we won.
Oh yes, and I'll tell you why I think also. I mean, for us to have gotten through scientific peer review as far as we had to overcome a lot, and for people that are kind of in Cy Gart's camp, they had to recognize some of, I think if Cy actually read our papers, he'd have to say, well, Sal has a point, because a lot of times in the debate he was saying, I agree with Sal. So I thought it was really piercing when you asked him about fitness, and then he admitted it's tautologous. I'm like, I was trying to say that's exactly the problem. It's not well defined. How do you? And he actually said, yeah, you don't really. That's a problem with the theory. I'm just like, yeah, that's exactly. I'm saying it's not, even by the standards of what we would consider science, that's very problematic. That you can't define your central quantity and you can't measure it. That's really bad. So
it's actually not that bad. Like, who cares if we don't know what the basic ontology of the universe is? Like, we can still do better in science. Like, we can get a mechanical model that predicts the motion of biological systems. And we shouldn't stop until we have that, because that's what we're looking for in physics. And if biology is just a subset of physics, then there's no reason we can't have it in biology as well.
Well, where I was headed with that is their definition of fitness doesn't agree with physics. We could make that argument. It is so incoherent, you can't even resolve it to physical quantities. So when I was saying you have gene loss, you can actually relate that to a slight loss of molecules, which is a slight loss of mass or whatever. That you can describe things in terms of physics. And so what was happening is you had something that was circularly defined, and in mathematics that's okay, because tautologies, that's how you build theorems and all. But for scientific theory, they have these things called tautologies that are analytic. statements, but what you want for scientific theories is synthetic statements. And the definition of fitness is the evolutionary definition is not a synthetic statement. It's a tautology, which means it can't make predictions. It can't, and if it can't make predictions, it also has the problem you can't reconstruct history of what actually happened in the past, which is what they're claiming to do. So there were a lot of problems. I thought that we did very well. We have a very hostile crowd, and I couldn't believe it when Amy was saying, after I showed all those papers about gene loss, she's just like, well, obviously things evolve, and you know, I'm just like, well, what about all the papers I just cited of all the experiments that shows that you're de-evolving? So, I mean, that was you know, I think that required a lot of just like totally ignoring what I had to say, where I was citing papers and experiments where I showed that there's gene loss. I said, you can't evolve a microbe into something as complex as a human by a process of losing parts. That's just not going to work. And I think it just kind of flew over her head.
Yeah, I mean, she debates this constantly and probably has her talking points. So whether she actually heard, thought, and was responding directly to what you were saying versus her prepared talking points from having moderated these debates, participated in these debates, done pre-streaming on these debates. So just a lot of talking past each other.
So someone was talking about NP completeness. I'm not really much into evolutionary algorithms, but be able to create a requirement specification for certain kinds of functional proteins, they are like passwords, and passwords are NP hard problems. Genetic algorithms will not solve them. So I'm just responding to someone, Sinister Porpoise or something. I'm sorry, that was I was reading the comments. So yeah, I felt we won on the evidence. Doesn't, you know, it's very hard to get people to be persuaded. I mean, it was just kind of hard. I mean, Amy was nice, but it's like, I just gave you just all the falsifications, and I think it's going to, and she was like, you know, genetic, it's not accepted, but most people don't accept genetic entropy. And then I said, look, there's not one person that disagrees with the hypothesis of any reputation. I'm just like, that felt like cognitive dissonance. It's like, can you name one person that thinks the human genome's improving? I mean, of some repute. There's no one that thinks that. You know, as a species, do you think on the whole we're getting healthier? And no one thinks we are. You know, anyone that's actually studied heritable diseases. So,
well, their argument would be that, like, on a larger time scale, the humans that are more adapted to whatever's causing the illness are going to be more likely to reproduce. So you can't, it's unfalsifiable in the following way. They always have to appeal to this insurmountably long time period during which their own predictions couldn't possibly be verified, right? So it is necessarily speculative when you start having to appeal to, oh, well, you have to wait, you know, a really, really, really long time before this is actually going to happen. So I'd say that's what I would be more suspicious of there, because their model does predict that there ought to be genetic decay, because they say that most genetic mutations are maladaptive and that only some of them are adaptive.
Okay, so there's one problem. So when Cy-Gart showed those equations of the P, which is the P and the Q, which is the proportion of the alleles. Okay, so like you have a certain proportion of the population that's green and another proportion that's red, supposedly. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical. they define adaptation as when, the most reproductively successful, they either become all green or all red. They call that adaptation. And the problem with that definition is it's just like the hiker. So he dumps all of his equipment and now he's really fast. You could say he adapted. Now he's fast because that was his goal. But now he's confronted with other adverse environments where he needs that extra winter clothing, the tent, these other stuff. He's maladapted to other environments. So this whole thing of how they define adaptation is very circular, and it's very confusing. So it's all resolves into defining adaptation in terms of your reproductive efficiency. So I kind of gave the example of Octomom. She had all these babies. Does that make her, more adapted than someone, who's actually prospering in the world and who's, skillful and capable? And that's the problem with the definition of adaptation in evolutionary biology. It's based on reproductive efficiency. So, someone who has fewer children, it's like, okay, they're maladaptive, and that really doesn't, there's a little bit of a problem with that. And survival and being able to cope with your environment is more than the ability to make babies, because there are people that, are no longer childbearing or never born children. They're obviously surviving and thriving, and they're very adapted to their environment. You don't have to, yeah. So it's this whole thing in defining adaptation in terms of how many offspring you make and how many offspring survives. That's the problem. One of the problems with evolutionary theory, they have their own measurements for adaptation, and they really don't make intuitive sense medically speaking.
So, Duva, do you think we won or what?
Well, I mean, winning has to be defined within a narrow set of rules. So it would just mean the polling or the changing in polling. But no, I don't think these debates are really kind of win-loss things. So, like if you gain some subs, you meet some new people, you learn some things, versus like audience polling or some objective, like I didn't flow the debate. If you tried to do like a point score system of actual arguments, judgment of winning arguments, I'm not even sure it's productive to think in terms of winning or losing, to say, what was your objective in going into the debate, and did you meet your objectives, versus implying that you won, implying that they lost.
I felt I threw out more experimental evidence, and as far as science is concerned, I think the experiment takes higher priority, and also observational evidence. So I cited several papers where, okay, there's that one, the paper Evolution by Gene Loss.
But you're going into like a technical debate scoring where, like, point counterpoint, where if you introduce a point and they didn't directly counter the point, you get a point, and then you're going to add up all the arguments that they didn't reply to, and give yourself points and claim victory. I'm not even sure that matters to although I mean, probably like on a technical debate level, to say maybe you guys won, but I'm not sure it matters that sense, and there's very few technical debaters out there, and even the modern debate audience, almost none of them are technical debaters. Most of the audience and the moderators may not even understand technical debating at all. So
that might be why evolution is so controversial, is because it's poorly understood, and when stuff's poorly understood, people tend to get triggered. And they have these strong opinions, and they reach for the justification, but they've never thought it through. So it can be frustrating,
So, I didn't mean to trigger like self. I'm triggering you when I said like you like rejecting the I. Like, no, like you don't actually, you can't. You have to presuppose that there's I that actually feels pain. But like, if I'm the philosophical, you just like, well, truth claims, and say like, okay, I accept that maybe there is no I. the pain I feel is just an illusion. But when you question a person's worldview and they're not ready, a person's worldview is connected to their essence, and it is triggered, and because generally a person's worldview is part of their identity, and especially in front of an audience, a debater that theoretically has thought about their worldview, they're representing a worldview, and in all of these debates, almost everyone always declares victory. So I'm sure Amy, and I don't know if Dr. Sai is probably not going to be there on her post show, but if he was, everyone declares victory after the debate. And once you reach like a platform, like I told Jennifer, like at a big debate, both sides do the same thing afterwards. They shake hands and sign books. So like if you actually, I don't know, you publish papers, but like have you written a book, or are you author?
I'm writing a book. I'm writing two. One is an anti-evolutionism book.
Presumably, like if you did participate in an in-person debate, you and your opponent would do the exact same thing after. You would both set up a table and shake hands and sell signed books afterwards, and say, well, who won? And you say, well, you both won. You both had a line of people waiting to shake your hand and buy your books and get a signature afterwards. So, like in that respect, saying like once you make it to the the big league, everyone walks away a winner, and then it's only for like academic technical scoring, or like you're legitimately saying like they didn't say anything that you didn't know, you weren't prepared for, and you didn't really learn anything. Like in a good debate, if you're debating someone that's done a lot of research, put a lot of thought into it, like yeah, they're going to hit you with a whole bunch of things that you weren't ready for, that you could have answered better. Everything that didn't happen, like they didn't hit you with anything you didn't feel prepared for, that you have, like that's going to send you back to the books to do more research on, that you felt. And so I don't know if on that level, like how you'd assess it, like you like they didn't hit you with anything you weren't prepared for, or you're not walking away like, oh man, like I got to research this aspect and put a lot more work into it.
Well, certainly Amy didn't hit me with anything I wasn't prepared for. And so the way that I score a debate, how well, first and foremost thing is which side is closer to the truth to begin with. So example, for a flat earth debate, clearly there's one side that is right and one side that's dead wrong. I mean, it's, it either is or it's not. And then we can actually judge the performance of how well each side articulated it. So I would say our side was closer to the truth. And then also I think we articulated it well. I mean, when Jen confronted Sai about the definition of fitness, and he said, there is a problem with this. And just like, yeah, that's exactly the point. That's why, all of this stuff that evolutionists have been hanging their hat on, they can't even measure it. And when I talk about measurement, I'm just like, okay, you can measure like how much something weighs. That's really, really basic in science. There has to be at least something you can measure, you can count, and they can't do that. And that's, I mean, there are ideas where you don't have precise measurements, but if you're talking about science, you have to have something that's measurable. And when you can't define it or you can't measure it, it's no longer quite in the realm of science. I mean, there are true statements where you may not be able to have measurements, and that's fine. But if you're going to classify something as a scientific theory, especially if you're claiming it's the center of biology and you can't measure some of its central quantities, I said it's probably not. It's probably not the basis of biology, and it's probably not a scientific theory.
Yeah, but there were a lot of structural problems with the debate. Like one, it was like a really short time for introductions, and like presumably the affirmative should have went first. So like the evolution side probably should have been the affirmative, and then you should have been the negative. And so you guys went first.
I thought the challenger went first.
Well, if that's how they do it, but I'm saying in terms for the logic.
Yeah, so we're the challengers because we're going
the
against
logical structure is they're presenting evolution, and then you're arguing against it. So if you're going first, I mean, I guess everyone, relatively, yes, everyone knows what evolution is, but if you're the negative and you go first, it's very difficult to present arguments against something that hasn't been presented yet. And so that was problematic in the first place, just for the structure of the arguments, that the negative went first. And he was like, okay, you were the challenger. And I don't even know what it means that you were the challenger. But
because there's presupposed to be a school that has a set of orthodox doctrines, which are presupposed to be the conventions. If you challenge those conventions, you come in and state your case, and then you get a response. The people with the extant orthodoxy don't get to come in and reassert their position like some sort of a self-congratulatory circle jerk or something.
Well,
that's how I understand it. But in some cases, you can't go by that convention because it isn't clear that there actually is a convention. Like in the case of evolution, the convention is that it's real. So, well, I'd be open to a different convention, but you're saying, well, because of how the debate title was phrased, therefore they should have gone first, or because the affirmative always goes first. That's crazy.
Because you have to present the argument. So if you're arguing against an argument, you can't go first. First, the argument has to be presented. So if you just say, well, everyone knows what evolution is, then it's not even necessary for them to give an introduction, or their introduction should be directly countering your arguments. So I'm saying
so both a positive and a negative are going to have presuppositions. You said so yourself.
Yeah, but saying structurally.
And in some cases, it's unclear who's making the positive assertion.
This debate was a complete mess.
Abortion. Is abortion a positive or a negative assertion?
Yeah, but for the first,
are you minus a kid or are you plus an abortion? So the way you're framing it seems to be unclear.
No, what I'm saying is very clear. Like it's just the affirmative should go first. So the fact that you went first made the debate awkward and hard to follow the arguments that the negative went first. And then also that there was just such a short time that no one finished their presentation. So it just went into a discussion and it was basically just a mess. It couldn't be followed. You were saying from the start, just in structuring the logic of the arguments, you can't structure the arguments when in the same logical way when the negative goes first. And then when nobody finished their introduction, so we didn't even know what any of your arguments really were. They're all condensed, and then you just jumped into conversation. So I was saying, from a technical perspective, the debate was a mess. And so I'm saying, like, I would just straight up say, like, yeah, they probably, you guys probably should have went second, and the affirmative should have went first, and then they should have given longer times at the beginning, maybe even like 20 minutes each, like 10 minutes each. But and so I mean, I don't know if you appreciate my critique, but I think you're just from that, it was a mess from the beginning in the way that it was such a short time and that you went first, not second. I don't know if anyone in the chat agrees, or you're not following my criticism on why the debate was a mess, just structurally from the way they structured it.
Well, yeah, the moderator shouldn't have let someone, the first debater, go back into their slideshow.
Well, you probably should have just had longer times in the beginning. I don't know if they asked you or you agreed upon such short introduction times, if that's something they just said, or they asked you and you mistakenly said, like, yeah, why you had such short time for the introductions.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it probably would have made more sense to have like a 10-minute introduction instead of 6. Because everybody's introduction, apart from maybe Amy's, was
and I don't mean to critique you, but like,
was somewhat long.
I think you should be able to keep time on your own. So like, you asked, how much time do I have left twice? Is that complicated to track your own time? It's kind of like disturbing that you even had to ask twice how much time you had left. Like, why can't you track your own time?
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I don't know what to say to that. You know,
I
I
had
should have
a
tracked my own time.
I used my smartphone. It has a stopwatch. I mean, just for me.
Yeah, I mean, you lost like 20 seconds by saying like, how much time do I have left? And they have to wait like 5-10 seconds for them to answer. And you asked that twice. So you lost like 20 seconds just asking how much time you have left. And like, I mean,
Okay,
like,
you need to beat a dead horse. I get it.
I don't know which
So
position
I
should
put
go
a
first. Who
I put
should
a
go
poll
first?
in the chat.
It's affirmative or negative in terms of, I'm not sure that if you're just saying the orthodox position or the affirmative. So I don't know what you mean. The first should be the affirmative, or if you're claiming the,
Oh yeah, I guess I was distracted, so I should say the positive instead of the first. Yeah, my bad. I'm trying to do too many things at once. Yeah, so
You did fine, Jen.
thanks. Yeah, I thought so. I wish I had more. I wish I had spent more time on my actual argument in my opening rather than like my skepticism and those comments.
I'll tell you the problem with. I've said this before. Either debates are for theater or they're for after getting after the truth. And for the most part, the format for modern day debate is for theater. It's not for establishing what's true. And so these short debate formats are just killers. And there's also what they know called as Brandolini's law. And in a short debate format, so Brandolini's law says it takes like so much more effort. I call it like 40 times more effort to refute something false than it is to, it takes, someone can say something false and you need 40 times more effort than it took to actually make that false statement.
Yeah, that's where you have to tighten up rhetorically through a deeper command of logic, where you basically ask a question that you take everything they say and ask a question that is going to expose the weak parts of what it is that they're saying. Or if you want to go a step farther, like for an active debate, you can like infer the false conclusion of their position yourself and then ask them to respond to what could be called a straw man but isn't. So that's where you have to like increase your skills in logic to tighten up on rhetoric. Otherwise, it just ends up being really long responses, which you lose the audience at some point with those.
What I was pointing out, though, is that there are situations I've been in debate where the guy just kept telling one falsehood after another, and just like he supposedly refuted my points, but he quote unquote did it with saying something that's false experimentally, or if someone were, and I'm just like, am I going to spend all my effort just trying to show what his refutations were just based on falsehood, and I don't actually get to state the truth. I'm spending more time just kind of dealing with garbage, and that's a dishonest tactic.
do you have formal debate experience?
The audience ends up losing interest because you're taking so much time digging up references and showing where the guy was wrong. I saw a debate where a guy said that's not a peer-reviewed journal. He totally made that up. It was a peer-reviewed journal. It's one of the most prestigious ones, but he was making up stuff all the time. It was disgusting. I got tired of watching, and I debated him once and never debate him again because he was rude and he was just full of BS, and it just wasn't worth my time. I mean, I could that's what they call trolls. They could just make life miserable for you and just make the discussion so unpalatable you don't get to communicate, because part of the goal of a debate is hopefully that you can communicate your ideas well, and there's a lot of these games where they'll just play around and prevent you from communicating. So
do you have formal debate experience? Sal, did you do like competitive debate in university or high school, or what's your background in debate?
I don't do a lot of no formal debates, and I'll point something out. We don't have debates in mathematics by and large. There are some, but we don't have debates in mathematics. I said, one of the most respected fields in the human enterprise is mathematics. The physicists, respect the mathematicians, and so do the chemists. There's not a lot of debate, and that's what I'm like, it's true or it's not. Sometimes there's a lot of uncertainty. That's why you would have debates, but then a lot of this is for theater. So,
What are you currently at a university now?
yeah, I've been accepted.
When I was at University of Michigan, in the physics department, but I think the math department also, I mean, they have a weekly presentation from a professor or a visiting professor that's open, sometimes open to everybody, but usually just a handful of other grad students, maybe professors or interested students on campus. A lot of times pretty small, will present something, and then there'll be um, questions, sometimes semi-hostile. I mean, not like in a mean way, but in a way of you're trying to pick holes in the person's presentation. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, like, or if
Well,
what school you're at. If
well,
there's going to be a weekly presentation, if
well,
you would go to that, or you'd be like someone in the audience that would try to, tear holes into the person's presentation.
well, skepticism is healthy. If and but it's not about debate. So, I mean, if you're building a medical device, if you're building like an aerospace device, you'd want people to be testing out your ideas, and you want to lay forward, how you would be able to represent what what you're doing is correct. But we don't have formal. I mean, there are some things that are mathematically controversial, but some of the basics are not. We don't have debates over stuff, and yet, if they're saying evolution's a fact, and we're still having these debates, it's like, no, it's not. It's not yet of the status of a really good theory. So we have debates because there's uncertainty about what's true, and that's what's astonishing about the flat Earth debates. It's like, okay,
You have to have a
it's
debate
uncertain in
strategy.
their mind. It's uncertain in their mind, but I'm just like, well, there is a way to settle this. Uh, you
Did
know
you have a debate strategy going into this debate?
what?
Did you have a debate strategy going into this debate?
I had goals. I had a goal, not a strategy. My goal was to test out the strength of my ideas. I wanted to see, especially since Dr. Gart was there, I wanted to see if he could shoot down some of the stuff that I put forward. And I was very pleased to see that he said, I actually agree, have a lot to agree with. Um, but he still thinks that things are evolving. It wasn't clear whether he thinks things are still evolving to more complexity, and I just don't see it. I see in the biosphere at the present kind of a simplification that starts with the extinction of existing species, but then this is a testable hypothesis. All major life forms on the whole are losing genes. I mean, there's information being lost in the biosphere, biological information. It's never going to be recovered either.
But do you stream? Do you have your own channel?
Evidence, I have two. I have Evidence and Reasons, and then also Evidence Reasons Academy. The Academy is really that's a nerd torture one. You're going to see a lot of just crazy topics in science.
I did formal competitive debate. I mean, I model myself a little bit of a debate coach, and it's like competitive debate. Besides for like the regional, state, big championships, or sometimes the final round, it's usually just the debaters and the judge. So if you're in a tournament, high school or university debate, and they pair you off, and then you go to a room, and the only people in the room are the debaters and a judge, or possibly like a scout for another team that's there to like scout you out for in case they come across you in a later round. But so it's a different venue when you have a competitive debate, and the only people in the room are you, the opposing team and the judge, or we talk like in university where it's just experts. Like if you're in the math department or physics department, and let's say you had an informal debate on a topic, but the only people there were experts in the department, and you could assume a certain high base of expertise, versus a public debate where the vast majority of the people don't have expertise. And so you have to model your strategy based on your opponents and the venue and the audience, and then you come up with a certain strategy. And when you're on a place like Modern Debate, where you have a relatively large platform, a few hundred people watching, maybe thousands of people, even tens of thousands of people could watch the stream, listen to the debate at a future time. You're talking mostly to the audience, that you want to be directly talking to the audience. And most of it is going to be to non-experts, where you're going to have to explain the average thing probably to like a lower, if you're aiming like a lower undergraduate level understanding of science. And that's why I mentioned, for if it's like a big debate like this, a lot of the times, well, victory means gaining subs to your channel, selling books, audience capture, that not necessarily people thinking you win, but people migrating to follow you on your platform. So did you win the debate? Well, how many subs did you gain to your channel as the measurement of how successful your debate was, as opposed, like I said, like, well, did you win if it was just you, them, and the judge in the room?
Well, for me, I mentioned this to Jen, that because we said, why are we debating this? One of them was a favor to James. I told him I don't like doing this very much, but I'll do it for him as a friend, to help his channel. So I succeeded in helping him at least have a show for a Saturday night. And then also, really for me, is to test out my ideas and how well I can articulate it, especially under the gun like that. And also to see what the opponent has to say in response, because this will be it's a picture into how people may critique my book, whether it will be legitimate. I didn't see anything today that would overturn what I put forward, because what I put forward was referencing stuff that's experimental evidence. So they can continue to ignore the experimental and observational evidence, but unless they could throw something out. I mean, no one really contested. I mean, there's a data point. There are 2 data points. I said, is there a common ancestor for all proteins? No one challenged that. No one successfully challenged that. That's very problematic. And then second, I mean, that was second. The first thing was natural selection doesn't work as advertised, and I don't think that was successfully challenged. So I was trying to, it's important to test this out at university grade, because I'm writing for university students, for science students. They'll be in biology classes. They would understand.
Well, I'm not sure if your strategy matches the platform. To say like a more reasonable strategy for Modern Day Debate would have been like, my goal was to gain fans and followers. If your book was already published, your goal would like to sell copies of your book. That it's not, Modern Day Debate's not a high academic platform to test your ideas. I'm saying like you might better test your ideas by having a small conversation with Dr. Gert, even a private conversation offline, or or even me and you, if you want to discuss your book, we may, saying actually you just want to test your ideas. We might do it better having a conversation offline, or a small conversation with experts. That's not the venue of Modern Day Debate. Very few experts are even watching that. I mean, I don't know if you're seeing what I'm saying, in the sense that it's good to be humble or be serious, but like Modern Day Debate, if a more reasonable goal would have been to just get your name out there to more people, gain fans and followers.
It is not the right platform for determining whether this is true or not. It is a good test platform, like batting practice is, to see if it can be articulated in a reasonably short amount of time and effectively. It's going to be tough. I believe the way to move forward is to actually have people learn more about biology, and about genetics and about some of the protein chemistry. I mean, it's kind of sad. People are buying off in evolution. They don't understand protein architecture. It probably would be 1 or 2 days of study to see this. And so it was a good, you do batting practice partly also for yourself, not necessarily, with the anticipation someday you're going to be on a big platform to try to impress other people. So this is kind of a dress rehearsal for future things.
Well, it's also pyramidal. I mean, saying experts are rare. So if your ideas are really technical, there's a very limited number of people, maybe even only tens of thousands of people in the world that are going to really comprehend your ideas. There's never going to be a mass platform for that in the level of teaching. So like I mentioned, like if you're in the university and you're speaking just to your fellow professors, even an undergraduate, they're not going to dare raise their hand and ask a simple question. Like, you're just an undergraduate, like, like you come back when you get your PhD and you'll know the answers, and don't ask stupid questions and waste our time. Versus, you're talking to a larger platform, or if you like teaching, where you're going to like, okay, like you're going to break down and say, okay, now I'm going to explain, which is to somewhat an undergraduate or even lower level explanation of an idea. So, I mean, it becomes very difficult to speak to a larger audience at different levels where expertise is varied, and what is worth explaining, what is worth just assuming that most people are not going to understand it, and saying, well, technical, are you going to say something technical even though almost no one's going to understand it, or try to break it down and then waste like 5 minutes giving some sort of basic explanation of something in order that maybe they could understand a more complex idea, or just jump into your rhetoric, or kind of like sell yourself to refer to your work. If you want to know more about it, I have more information. So I mean, it's tough to compartmentalize it in what somewhat's a performance. So there's so many people that it's I mean, if you said that yourself, like it's more like a performance than a debate for modern day debates.
I did want to say something. I've not been in. Um, you mentioned whether I'd been in any formal debates. No, but I have been interested in the idea of rhetoric. So I think the two are related. Evolution is mostly a rhetorical theory. It uses a lot of very unwholesome logical fallacies and rhetoric. It uses a lot of equivocation, lots of equivocation. It uses lots of non sequiturs, and it uses circular reasoning. And I'm very interested. So, in a sense, to be able to dissect evolutionary theory, you have to be kind of really schooled in rhetoric, both rhetoric and being able to recognize logical fallacies. So when I've been in textual debates, they kind of hated, my opponents kind of hated this. I'd break down where they had logical fallacies. I said, that was an equivocation. That was a straw man. That was a non sequitur. That was circular reasoning. And when you actually look at evolutionary theory, even in the published stuff, it has lots of that, lots of circular reasoning, lots of equivocation, lots of non sequiturs. And I'm just like, this doesn't have the structure of a real scientific theory. Part of the reason for that is they're not constrained by real experimental evidence. They can make stuff up. There's no way to verify a lot of their claims. You can kind of try to falsify it with present day experiments, and that's why I was citing them. But they can make a claim about this or that, and who's going to be able to refute them? They could just make stuff out of the air. They're under no constraints, and then they use a lot of unwholesome things. So I am interested in the debate side in terms of being able to analyze rhetoric. So Amy kept saying, "This is fact. This is fact." I'm just like, well, what is fact, and what is kind of just kind of your own?
Well, rhetorically, the way I'd say to push back on that is to just like say question like, why do you have to appeal to facts so much? If a theory is factual, shouldn't its facticity speak for itself?
Yes. Yes.
So that would be rhetorically. Now, logically, just attack the weak points of the theory. There's
so-
absolutely zero evidence that genes cause the phenotype. Zero. Yet this is a presumption of the model.
there was
So
one
I
other-
find the two-punch works well, because if they're rambling, you got to rhetorically stop the ramble, but then you want to hit back, and that's better to be logical. Like, it can still be rhetorical, but it should be more logical, because you want to give them something to respond to that puts you in control in the direction of the conversation. You don't always need to be in control of the direction of a debate. It doesn't look good, but it's better to be able to be in control arbitrarily, if that makes sense.
And yeah, and there was one other thing she said. Evolution's the backbone of biology, and I could have pointed something out. I just didn't want to be too mean. I said, look at all the creationists that are in biology. They totally disbelieve evolution. That they're prospering, so you don't need it. The other thing is, and I didn't want to be too insulting. If it were any other one than Amy and Sygart, I would have been insulting. I'd have said, all the research teams that are trying to figure out biology, the last skill set that they need is an evolutionary biologist. That's why I cited the article. So many of the engineers working in biology, because they have the right skill set. It's because they understand, because of the whole viewpoint of design. So it was nice to hear Sygart said, I liked teleology, which is purposefulness. So you design things for a purpose, and that's the right way to view biology. And so these teams that are trying to do, pharmaceutical research or understand how the cell, and they try to study the cell. The last people that they'll hire are evolutionary biologists, because all they can do is tell stories. And at Sygart School, the one that I attended, one of my professors didn't have a single biology class. They hired him. He was a PhD in electrical engineering, and they needed someone to help understand how the human ear works. He was the perfect match. They hired him instantly without him having any biology. It's because the ear, engineers build audio devices. They understand how to process sounds. They didn't hire an evolutionary biologist. So that team in cellular neuroscience, they didn't have any evolutionary biologists. So when Amy said it's the backbone of biology, I really had to bite my tongue and not say something too insulting, because, I like the people, our opponents. It was hard to be as confrontational as I normally would be.
There's a question in the audience about Duvid's credentials. I don't know if you want to say anything on that. I didn't want to speak for you.
I tried to answer it in the chat. I'm saying, I just have a bachelor's in general studies. Although I have quite a few credit hours. I have almost like 200 credit hours, because I took forever to get my bachelor's. I tried to, major in physics and psychology and linguistics, and none of that worked. So I just ended up general studies, and I took about a year of civil engineering, but I didn't get a master's in that. And then I studied.
Something of an anarchist.
Well, I have relatively quite a bit of formal. I got up to like 400 level. I got up to senior level physics, senior level mathematics. Even I was pre-med, so I took like organic chemistry and basic biology and chemistry. Although I didn't take biochemistry, and I also spent 3 years in yeshiva, like rabbinic study. But I'm academic, so I'm always reading. I've taken like hundreds of edX courses, and thank God I've been privileged to basically spend 25 years, my whole adult life, in study. So I spend hours every day just reading books, studying all sorts of subjects. But in terms of credentials, I don't have any necessarily like super impressive credentials.
Well, you've read more books than most people.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And you do have an appreciation for like transparent representation. So that's a level of metacognition most people don't have. And I know that's like an informal judgment. But I do respect David because, unlike most people, he has an awareness, if not an understanding, of his presuppositions. And this gets him in a lot of trouble because what he asserts as mere fact gets interpreted as like sort of a dig at someone else's worldview. But as Lambie said, you know, if you can learn to understand David's style of communication, is a wealth of relevant information.
Yeah, I like debate. I competed high school debate, actually only as a freshman, but reached all the way to state championship level. I followed debate. I've studied debate. I've been participating in you know internet debate for many years, and consider myself even a little bit of a debate coach. You know, like on a technical level, I told Jennifer about flowing, and I agree with Sal also that generally I just like debate to test out my own ideas and polish my own arguments and learn what I don't know. So when you argue, when I debate someone good that knows a lot about the subject, that's representing the other issue well, they are going to find the biggest holes in my argument, pin me on it, and I'm going to come away from the debate knowing what I need to research and study more. And sometimes the audience or audience feedback, like the chat or crowdsourcing information. Although I was trying to express the point on expertise versus general audiences, and like modern day debates, not just the general audience. They're little academic. I assume most of the people are read books or study like some educational content, have university degrees, but I'd say like aim it at like a lower undergraduate level, and it's a reasonable audience. I'm sure there's quite a few PhDs, authors, people that might watch the content that you could gain from. But I'd say it'd be different if you had a technical, and say generally evolution's not debated among experts, and it's very difficult to debate because there's so many presuppositions. And like if Sal did have theories, like I mean, God willing, it'll be all varieties of audience. Like you could, if they put me in front of an elementary school, I could probably give a lecture on something and make it applicable to elementary students. Or if you're going to be in a group of, PhDs or experts at university, that hopefully also you have something interesting to say, and your feedback is going to be different, and probably all of the feedback's useful. And explaining simple ideas is sometimes proves the most difficult.
I like what you said, that you look at it as an opportunity to test out your ideas. For me, I want to know that I'm correct. I also have responsibility as I'm trying to teach. A lot of people are approaching me and asking me to, what I think about this or that. And I want to get it right. I mean, it's going to bother my conscience if I teach them something wrong. And so that's why I went through a lot of trouble to cite these papers. I said, look, these are papers not written by creationists. These are written by evolutionists. I said, okay, you're going to hear it from them. And I said, these look very incriminating, but at least my conscience is clear. I said, okay, look, even the evolutionists themselves, I mean, that's why I quoted Jerry Coyne. He said, in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom. I mean, it's not, I mean, from a philosophical standpoint, it's elevated, but scientifically, it's not respected. That may be hard to swallow, but when you actually look at research teams and the people who are really respected for, making breakthroughs, it's not evolutionary biologists.
There's different levels that evolution comes in. So say it's the dominant view in certain academics, universities, certain departments, and if you poll different fields, you might get different numbers. Like in medicine and biology, the numbers might be quite high. Generally medicine is the largest area where it's evolutionary medicine, and where there's actually a licensing, like a core curriculum. So depending on what you're teaching or what field, there might be a core curriculum, a basic understanding what your students are supposed to walk away with, and then if it's a professional field where you actually have to take a test and be licensed and have so to say expected knowledge, where you're passing your board exams, getting credentialed, and you're expected to give back certain answers, as opposed to when you're actually doing research and publishing papers, and how to get your paper published or peer reviewed, or any of these processes. So even the question, well, what is true? How do you know what's true? You have to, philosophically, your truth has to be framed in a metaphysical framework, even to say, well, what does it mean to be true? How do you verify truth? What's the role of science? And then, presumably you're also a Christian or something. If you have beliefs, people have different beliefs. Or you could say, well, I also think my religious beliefs are true. I accept uncertainty, but I don't, ascribe to my religion because I don't think it's true. I think it's true, but it might be a different standard of truth that you apply to things like law, morals, ethics, and religion than science.
I actually, it's surprising. There was a poll of medical doctors, and it shocked the evolutionary community how there is a significant minority, not the majority, that don't believe in evolution, that are medical doctors. And I meet a lot of very successful medical doctors that don't believe in evolution. And so they're dealing with, here you have a set of, you have professionals that deal with biological organisms. That's their profession, and they don't believe in evolution. I don't know how I got on that topic, but that's why I don't think it's a really good. I mean, you can say, what do you mean by a good theory? I'll say, okay, look, if we're talking about a scientific theory that has application, where believing it is important to for certain professions, then that's what I call a good theory. So if you're going to be an electrical engineer, you have to believe in some of the theories about electricity. And it's borne out, because if you don't believe it, like if you don't believe there's a positive and a negative, you're not going to be successful as an electrical engineer. That was one of the first breakthroughs, believe it or not, in electromagnetic theory, that there's such a thing as a positive and negative charge. I mean, put it this way, they're opposite charges. We give it the label positive and negative, but that was actually a pretty big discovery by Gilbert. You don't have stuff like that in evolutionary theory, where if you don't accept it, you're not going to be able to describe a biological organism correctly. I mean, I still say I encourage people to study evolutionary literature, because so much of the way we describe like proteins, we use evolutionary language, and it's like, well, you don't really need it, but it's kind of embedded in the culture now that to be successful, you have to understand what they mean. But they put kind of some superfluous evolutionary stuff on there, but you just have to kind of live with it. But it doesn't mean you have to believe it's the actual true description.
Yeah, that's what I mean. We're probably in agreement if we're all religious of different natures, and say, well, evolution's somewhat a metaphysical framework, and if you're religious, biblical, Hindu, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or a whole series of whatever, your metaphysical framework is probably in opposition to evolution, and that's why people like us enjoy debating against it, because I think it's important to say that I don't agree with this metaphysical framework, and I think that it's important actually to be open, or if you're actually within a group that has a clear oppositional metaphysical framework. So like, okay, I'm an Orthodox Jew. My local synagogue has really probably like 40 doctors. Like, I live in an upper middle class neighborhood, and the synagogue's maybe got 200 members, and probably 40 of them are doctors. And there's a private school people send their kids to, And if they teach you saying like, you want to get into school, you want to get into university, you want to become a doctor, uh, answer the question that they expecting you to put on the test so you could get into school, you'll get good grades and become a doctor. However, that's not what we believe. So you got to teach people, like your children or your students, you got to teach them, well, whatever reason, this is what they're going to teach you. And when you take the test, you should give them this answer, even though that's not what we believe. And so, so if you have children or students in your own manner that you might have to inform them in that manner for whatever reason, most people believe in evolution, or you want to get into school or become a doctor, you're probably best off answering the question like the way they want the answer given, and then to have your own alternative your framework for how you understand the phenomenon.
Well, one thing about, the metaphysics, that might be kind of like the emotional, there might be some of that involved in kind of like the motivational reason to assail evolution. But ultimately, it's just kind of like, I use the example, it's like, okay, I don't necessarily like looking at my bank statements because it never ever has as much money as I'd like to see. And so on a scientific standpoint, you can take kind of the assumptions of like what we would consider like fundamental theories, like say physics and things about chemistry and then cellular biology. I try to critique evolution on the assumption that, there's physics, there's chemistry, the accepted laws, there are laws about how cells work, and there's laws of probability. And I feel that the case, you can assail it just based on accepted science in other disciplines that would be considered probably a little bit more primary than evolutionary biology. It's not in agreement with those other theories, and it's not in agreement with experiment. And that's what I tried to point out today. I said, I don't have to use metaphysical. I didn't use a lot of metaphysical arguments as far as I could tell, except to say, if you accept kind of experimental evidence, if that's your only metaphysic, then it's not looking good for evolution.
Well, if you're bypassing your own personal beliefs, but it's like if you're part of a religion or a school or a group, and say like, well, no, I mean like my fellow Orthodox Jews, like we basically all believe in souls and standing judgment after death, and that something that survives death, and that's a fundamental part of our belief system. And the general metaphysics of evolution is in opposition to that. So there could be like a scientific level to say like, well, I'm a scientist and I believe in science, but I also unequivocally believe in religious principles like a soul and judgment after death, transmigration of souls, reincarnation, um, karma, uh, judgment, the power of prayer. And you said, well, those are not scientific beliefs. They're not scientific. They're philosophical. They're logical beliefs, but they're not scientific. They're harder to be open to testing in the scientific method. But the metaphysics of evolution generally is in opposition to those beliefs. And even say like consciousness, like say, I don't think I'm my body. I don't think my thoughts or the essential I is my body. And so like evolutionary type view, and say that I don't think that's a correct description of reality. So why is it so necessary for me to oppose evolution? It's because of my metaphysics of my presupposition that I have a soul and I'm not my body and I'm going to survive death. And there's certain metaphysical realities about God running the world, prayer working, action reaction, righteous being rewarded, wicked being punished, and so on and so on. I mean, I don't know if you have like Sal, do you have beliefs in those manners? Do you have like opinions on transmigration of souls, punishment after death, power of prayer, and how do they correspond with your scientific beliefs?
I believe in eternal life. I believe Jesus is the Messiah. I believe he rose from the dead. I believe in God, and part of that is why I believe in miracles is because I think life itself looks like it's a miracle. It's not to for living things to exist. There had to be something that assembled the first biological organisms, because the chemicals that were made out of all life is made out of are not. They have an inherent tendency not to organize. And so there is someone who's I don't know if it's the correct term. He's a Christian, but he's Jewish. Is James Tour, and he's making very good arguments, showing that it's really premature at best to say that life arose naturally. So if one is willing to believe in one miracle, and you're like, there has to be a miracle maker, and that's why I believe in God. And beyond that, some of the rest then is just accepted because I believe in answered prayer, and that's contributed to me continuing to be a Christian. And
You think evolution?
I want to add one thing. I think there is growing evidence Noah's flood was real, and if Noah's flood was real, that's affirming a lot of the Old Testament, and I think that's very powerful. So I have some Jewish colleagues. They're not Christians, but they're interested in Noah's flood. They're interested in creationism, and they've contributed to creationist viewpoints. So
that's cool. I think I'll be going to wrap it up soon.
Sure.
There's another after show on the Amy Newman channel, and I'll share the link for that if anyone here wants to pop over there. I'm probably going to join that stream.
Okay.
But yeah, Sal, if you have any last words, thanks again for sharing your views on evolution and a bit on theology. I was thinking maybe you and Duvid, if you wanted to, could have a stream together, because Duvid sometimes interviews authors. Well, and just gives them a chance to go through all the posits in their books, and he's a pretty good interviewer. So if you're interested, I'd be happy to.
Well, see, it's more of a booklet. The first one's an anti-evolutionism booklet. And actually, you heard a lot of the arguments that are going to be in that booklet. It's a matter of, it would be for biology students. So I'm hoping in 3 or 4 months. It's only going to be a 10-page booklet. I have to confer with my former boss, John Sanford. And that's it. Jen, thank you for hosting, and thank you for being.
Thanks, Sal. It was great to debate with you, and I think it was a really positive debate overall, and looking forward to the next one.
It was a great experience for me. So I don't know when I'll see you again, but wish you the best. It was very delightful hanging out with you. Thank you for having me on your after show.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, nice meeting you. And
do you want to say any
about your
concluding
booklet
remarks?
Yeah, just it was nice meeting you, Sal, and good debate performance. Interested you in your work. If you do come out with your booklet, I'd be interested to look at it. If you're making rounds, and happy to have you on my channel to interview you about it. And thanks, Jennifer, for doing the stream. Good work. Keep the debates and conversations alive. And have a great night.
Cool. Someone asked me to explain my model, so I'll just do that real quick before I wrap up here. And there's also a question from Josh Allen, is the next John Elway. What justifies a sound theory? Is it predictions higher than 50%, or is it something as simple as more predictions than the theory? It is replacing, it depends who you ask, right? So it really, if you are taking the view that, if that's your criterion, then fine. So it's just a question of whether that's an apt criterion. And I would say probably not. Like, I think you do need a model that is a complete model and that basically tells you not everything, but like everything within the domain that it's describing. So if it fails to make predictions within the relevant domain, then in my opinion, it should be discarded. Like, forget this half measures crap, you know? Just get rid of it and start over, because clearly some aspect of whatever it was you were presuming in your model was wrong. So how does my model work? It's you're looking at rejecting the concept of atoms. So there's no atoms in this model. So if you're thinking about understanding this in terms of atoms and particles, well, you got to let that go and realize that everything is just manifestations of fields. And then there's a primordial field, which is the quantum mechanical periodic table. So that's your standard periodic table rendered in 3 dimensions.
I'm going to sign off, Jen. I'll let you.
Sure, no problem. Nice talking to you, and thanks for your contributions. And we'll talk soon, hopefully. And if anyone wants to check out Duva's channel, I don't know if you want to link it in the comments there, but we just recently did a chat that was 5 hours of was supposed to be a metaphysical conversation, but ended up being a debate. I thought it was pretty fun. So
Okay, yeah, maybe I'll even join you on the
can
Amy Newman.
check. Oh,
thing.
awesome. Yeah, that would be great. I just looked over there. It doesn't look like there's too many people on. So if you join, that would be awesome. So I'm going to throw so Duva Chair's channel, check that out, whatever, blah, blah, but he's headed out. So yeah, I'll just keep going. Just make sure that my audio is coming through. All right, so I'm just going to assume that it is. And I'll continue with my explanation here. So from the periodic table, you start the periodic table, then you extend. So the periodic table has 4 different kinds of orbitals. So I've depicted them with 4 different colors. And on each side of the center, there's a reflection in the origin of the colors. So you can connect all those light colors together with lines. So you start with the F orbital, connect those all out together, and then one by one you connect to the orbitals. So there's 2 F orbitals, 4 D orbitals, it's all the way to 7 S orbitals. So you connect those with lines, and then you induce infinite motion on that shape. So the shape in itself has no intrinsic motion because the relations between the elements of the periodic table don't change. But there's motion in matter, which is induced upon this unchanging and within this unchanging form. And I'll have to change which one of these that I am sharing, because apparently it's not sharing. Here, let's see here. Here's the next one. All right, so here's the next one. Sorry, this is what I was describing earlier. Sorry about that. Okay, so have a look at this diagram. You're extending the components of the quantum periodic table, and you get this other shape. And this other shape is smooth because it represents the infinite motion induced on those connected components. And you get this shape that turns out to be the representation of the complement of the figure 8 knot, which you can think of, if you don't want to go into all the math and stuff, just think of it as the embodiment of 3 + 1. So that's the domain of possibility. And then from the domain of possibility, we want to move into the domain of observability. So we've established that possibility happens firstly from the periodic table, and then secondly from the infinite intrinsic motion of the quantum periodic table. And then if we start with that shape, from that shape, we can deviate it. So imagine it's like a ball of clay and you're just pushing on it. So there's a conservation of volume, which you want to think of as a kind of conscious pressure. And the conservation of volume induces pressure that increases the more deviated the shape is from its original shape. So you can think of, a fish as less deviated, a cell as less deviated. So a human is a lot deviated because we don't really look like that blob shape, but you can get to the human shape by starting at the blob shape. So that's the basic overview. there's a lot more to it, and I did briefly go into it on the show, but yeah, that's an introduction of just like the background of where you get to the starting point in thinking about evolution, and then from there, every single living organism would be somehow related to that original shape. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you're starting off with low intelligence, which spontaneously differentiates itself from the environment as a result of the pressure of the environment. So, like with the anglerfish, environmental pressure is in the form of darkness. Response via Le Chatelier's principle. So that's another one that's good to look up if you want to understand my mode of thinking. Le Chatelier's principle on an abstract level. I'll basically tell you the starting point for a lot of this logic. That in the least action principle. So we start out with these low intelligence, basically foragers, whose embodiment establishes itself as a reaction to environment, which we point to the anglerfish as sort of the most extreme example of this, but you can see less extreme examples. For example, the cactus. The pressure of the environment is dryness. So the cactus reacts by minimizing the effectiveness of desiccation by having this really thick skin. So that's your starting point for evolution. Now, I got to remember, this is all dependent arising. So in the actual model, everything happens at the same time. But if you're just going to explain, there's 3 components to this, I'm going to try to explain all 3 components at once. It's not going to make any sense. So I'm going to start with the one that can theoretically exist in the absentia of the others, which is the simplest one. So that's the, not anglerfish, but anglerfish type. Anything whose appearance is dictated by its environment. And it's obvious. So that's going to be your low intelligence. Now, the presence of such organisms creates another pressure differential. So always going back to Le Chatelier, any semi-closed system minimizes the pressure. So now we have pressure from these anglerfish type organisms, which means the whole system is going to react to minimize the direction of that pressure, which means it's going to introduce predators that can minimize the number of these more numerous animals, organisms that are evolved by proximity. Now, the predatory species is less influenced by its environment and more influenced by the conditions under which it is able to successfully accomplish predation. So this introduces a pressure towards intelligence for the purposes of predation. So the more intelligent you are, the more you can effectively predate. This causes the presence of these predators, which is another pressure. So what type of pressure do predators give? It can be chaotic. So then there's another pressure, which is intelligence, but not for competitive purposes, for cooperation purposes. Because cooperation gives us the stability that allows for colonization, that allows for civilizational stability. So all 3 of these things are always present to some extent in every organism. Like even the least evolved organism has like a fragment of that really high penetrating discerning intelligence is just manifested in a way that's not available to the cell. So all organisms are just different proportions of these contributions. So you can think of anglerfish as being at one end of it, where it's really pushing the limits of how much you can evolve due to environment pressure. Whereas humans are the other end, where we're pushing the limit of how much we can evolve due to pressure of collaborative and competitive intelligence. So there's the basic outline of my model. Again, feel free to join the post after show, which will be very cool. And I hope this explanation was a good start. Like if it's not totally clear, ask questions. Feel free to ask questions. I'll do more streams, explain more. I'm not trying to be obscurantist, although the stuff is somewhat difficult to understand. Once you get used to thinking in a top-down manner, it's a lot easier. So when you start learning, you just assume you're building up a pile of knowledge that you can just look up at something in basically a pile of like lookup table, like the librarian, and thinking that you can eventually build that pile all the way to the sky and have God's knowledge. But us non-dualists don't believe that's possible. We think it's heretical technically. We think if you want to have divine knowledge, which is the only true knowledge, you have to start from the top. So you start with basically infinity, and then you work your way down through conditions into observability. And the manner in which the conditions are emergent will determine how the aesthetic of your observability sort of framework. So this is why a lot of conversations end up in metaphysics, because people are going to be making appeals to physics, math to justify things in philosophy, which is in itself, that's actually a fallacy. Like, there is a way in which it could not be a fallacy, but the way in which it could not be a fallacy presupposes the establishment of an agreed upon criterion to judge the success of the system, which hasn't been established through a debate. So it's not the greatest path to go down. But yeah, have a think about it. A tripartite model where it's essentially competition between three primary modes of evolutionary manifestation of appearance, where the appearance is dictated by the environment, where it's dictated by predation of the environment, or where it's dictated by stability required for colonial considerations. So thanks everyone, and hope to see you on the other show. Bye for now.